Scotland recognises the very significant importance of nitrogen and climate change. Indeed, the element nitrogen was itself discovered in Scotland, and we are about to enter the 250th anniversary of its discovery here, literally next month. Nitrogen was discovered by Daniel Rutherford in his MD thesis at the University of Edinburgh in 1772. Interestingly, he was studying carbon dioxide and he sort of came across nitrogen, but it was a great finding. Interestingly, another fact, he was the uncle of Sir Walter Scott, the famous novelist, poet and historian, both men at the heart of the Scottish Enlightenment. The Enlightenment took place in the 18th and early 19th centuries with an outpouring of intellectual and scientific accomplishments. Debates took place right across the country in all sorts of venues, including the ancient Scottish universities of St Andrews, Glasgow and Edinburgh. The focus was on improvements and practical benefits for the individual and for society as a whole, not just in Scotland but internationally, and that was due to the esteem of which the scientists' and innovators' work was held. As we continue to find novel solutions to the global challenges we face today, including the COVID-19 pandemic, biodiversity loss, and climate change, this feels like the time for scientific communities across the world to work together for the good of all. Here in Scotland, we retain a reputation for excellence in science. We're a really strong science nation. In fact, Scotland punches above its weight in terms of the quality of science that's done here. A recent report looking at the Scottish science landscape compared it to the rest of the UK and to similar-sized countries with research capabilities across the EU and wider world. Some of the key findings in the report are that Scotland is number one in the UK in terms of the number of publications per researcher, and these publications were very highly cited. And more than half of Scotland's researchers are mobile, spending up to 2 years abroad, producing more papers and more impactful research than their colleagues who don't leave Scotland. To me, this really shows the power of international experience and research collaborations. And so with the world now assembling again in Glasgow, it's clearly time for us to find nitrogen again. This Rediscovering Nitrogen event in Glasgow marks the opportunity to embrace action on nitrogen as one of the world's great environmental challenges. It heralds a new enlightenment on the importance of carbon and nitrogen interactions and focuses on how action on nitrogen is a necessary next step to meet climate goals with multiple co-benefits for environment, health and economy. We know that action on carbon has to be at the heart of our commitment for net zero, but to get to net zero, we also need action on nitrogen. This is why the Scottish Government has committed to a Scottish National Nitrogen Balance Sheet as part of the Scottish Climate Act, an opportunity for us to show the multiple benefits of better nitrogen management for climate, air, water, biodiversity, health and the economy. The International Nitrogen Management System is itself based in Edinburgh, and we have our own homegrown leadership, including Professor Mark Sutton of the UK's Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and you'll hear from Mark later on. He is an expert on nitrogen science for environment and climate policies. We all look forward to working with countries involved in COP26 here in Glasgow and countries beyond, as we grasp the climate challenge with nitrogen as an integral part of that. So I would like to now introduce our first speaker, who is the Honourable Mahinda Amaraweera, and this speaker is the Minister of Environment in Sri Lanka. Please join me on this platform. If you'd like to come up this way.
Good evening. His Excellency the President of Sri Lanka, His Excellency the President of Maldives, Minister for Asia, South Asia, UN and Commonwealth of the UK, Honourable Ministers, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Director General of SACEP, Director of the International Nitrogen Management Systems, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me respectfully and warmly welcome you to the event Rediscovering Nitrogen. On behalf of Sri Lanka, let me thank the Government of UK for inspiring leadership on COP26 and hosting us in an excellent manner. Ladies and gentlemen, I recall the Scottish Enlightenment, where the chief values were improvement, virtue, and practical benefit for the individual and society. Here is Scotland. Daniel Rutherford discovered nitrogen. James Sutton established world's first nitrogen manufacturing plant. Let me appreciate all scientists, late and alive, for their work on nitrogen. Centuries after discovering nitrogen, we are rediscovering nitrogen again. Excellencies, as you know, nitrogen is very versatile, but we have overlooked its pollution aspects. I am extremely proud that Sri Lanka initiated Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. Sri Lanka became the first country in the world to take the decision to convert conventional agricultural lands 100% organic. As a result of courageous decision taken by His Excellency the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, a presidential task force was established. It aims to create a green socio-economy with sustainable solutions for climate changes. I am honored to be its chair. While being truly grateful for your excellent and courageous leadership, let me assure you, Your Excellency the President, we are working tirelessly to make your vision a reality. I am indeed happy that you are here with us today, sir. As we meet ahead of COP26, let me quote one of my President's statements at 75th UN General Assembly. I quote, "World leaders must better manage nitrogen, ensuring sustenance of humankind," unquote. Before I conclude, let me welcome all distinguished delegates once again. I wish this event all the success and may it be a memorable one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to specifically welcome His Excellency President Salih of the Maldives. You're very welcome. Our next speaker is Professor Mark Sutton himself. Mark is the Director of the GEF UNEP International Nitrogen Management System, and he's Director of the UKRI GCRF South Asian Nitrogen Hub. And Mark's going to tell us why nitrogen and climate. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much. Excellency, President Rajapaksa, Excellency President Solly from the Maldives, Baroness Scotland, Ken O'Flaherty, the Regional COP Ambassador for COP26 on behalf of Lord Ahmed, the Minister for the United Nations in the UK. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, you've really no idea how much work it took us to get here today. Maybe you do have an idea of how much work, but I'm not actually just referring to the event as we sit here today, or the event in Glasgow, the wider COP26 conference. Actually, I'm thinking about the work to get us here today. Every one of us was born. On the planet, there is now something like 8 billion people. 8 billion people is a huge number of people. And a few years ago, we made an estimate for a disreputable scientific journal called Nature, a dodgy journal, but anyway, scientists like it. And we estimated that nearly half of the people are alive on the planet because of the increased food production as a result of extra nitrogen inputs. The main nitrogen input that's happened in the last century is the Haber-Bosch process, taking pure nitrogen out of the air, dinitrogen, converting that into ammonia, and from that turning it into fertilizers. Now, I say a few years ago we made this number. I question the number now. I think actually what we found out was that we produced more nitrogen than we needed, because at the same time, livestock production has skyrocketed. And in fact, if you look at the world, 80% of the nitrogen in primary productivity in crops is going to feed livestock. Now, in some parts of the world, there's not enough. But in Europe, in North America, we're eating much more than we need. Our consumption patterns are a huge problem. And we're setting aspirations for people in other parts of the world to have huge consumption problems, which are fundamentally not sustainable. At the same time, of that nitrogen we're fixing in agriculture, 80%, and in fossil fuel, 80% is wasted to the natural environment. That's a terrible efficiency. So we're going to need to move forward. We need to reinvent the nitrogen cycle. As Julia said, this evening is about rediscovering the nitrogen cycle, rediscovering nitrogen for climate. And our message is firstly this. Of course, carbon is the first step for climate change mitigation, no question. But if we want to get to the nitrous oxide, which is an important part, we won't get it by technical measures. It's not enough. The only way to get it is by completely redoing our nitrogen cycle, looking at all the sources, all of our choices, our consumption patterns, everything. And when we do that, then we get the win-wins. The win-wins for air quality, water quality, biodiversity, stratospheric ozone layer, and economy, because as the Colombo Declaration has made clear, that goal to halve nitrogen waste, just the street value would be saving 100 billion US dollars per year. So this is really a big aspiration. This is our moment here to rediscover nitrogen for climate as we come into COP26. We welcome you to that. The Nitrogen for Net Zero initiative, which we've been working on with the government of Sri Lanka, is helping us forward. And with that, I think I'm going to not use too much time, but allow the next speaker to come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next item on the programme is the launch of Nitrogen for Net Zero. This is an initiative brought forward by the Government of Sri Lanka with SACEP, and it reflects the work of member countries in 2021. Thank you. next item is a video statement, and that's on the UN actions on sustainable nitrogen management, partnerships and the Interconvention Nitrogen Coordination Mechanism, or INCOM. And this has been recorded by Her Excellency Inger Andersen, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at the COP26 side event on the critical role of nitrogen in addressing environmental challenges that we face. My congratulations and thanks to the Government of Sri Lanka for its leadership on sustainable nitrogen management following the adoption of the Colombo Declaration and the UN Environment Assembly 4 resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. My thanks also to His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President of Sri Lanka, for his leadership on the nitrogen issue. And because UNEP is only as strong as its partners, my deep appreciation to Professor Mark Sutton, Director of the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology and Chair of the International Nitrogen Management Initiative. We are here today because we all agree that our misuse of nitrogen-based farming inputs and fertilizers as a quick fix to maintain soil fertility has come at a huge expense. For far too long, we have interfered with the Earth's nitrogen balance. The nitrogen challenge sits squarely within what we at UNEP call the triple planetary crisis: the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. Because nitrogen impacts each and every one of these crises. Allow me to share 3 messages as you deliberate today. Firstly, we can break the silos. Like many of the environmental challenges we face, the impacts of nitrogen cut across multiple policy domains. Nitrogen, science, and policy are fragmented between the domains and across ministries. So it's only apt that at COP26, as we gather to step up manifold on the actions we must take on climate, we pull together actions that policymakers can take to address the nitrogen challenge. Because, as IPCC has noted, nitrous oxide is a huge contributor to climate change, and it is one that needs far greater attention in the policy domain. And secondly, we have the opportunities to work together, but we must make the most of them. Following the adoption of the UNEP 4 resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, UNEP has established an intergovernmental nitrogen working group that includes designated national focal points in 44 countries. The aim of this group is to talk across relevant multilateral environmental agreements and programs to accelerate joint progress on nitrogen-related challenges. And I'm really pleased to note that the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that is being negotiated right now calls for a reduction of nutrients lost into the environment by at least half. And UNEP's Global Partnership on Nutrient Management has been promoting dialogues and actions with academia, the scientific community, and NGOs towards addressing this call. And my third point, deliver on the Colombo Declaration. In 2019, 15 countries committed to the Colombo Declaration, aiming to halve nitrogen waste by 2030. We have the solutions: improve the performance of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, increase the use of organic fertilizers, boost recycling of nutrients from agriculture, improve wastewater treatment, reduce food waste, just to name but a few. We all know this. This is simple. Now, as we seek to urgently deepen the climate action and to strengthen our NDCs, which are not good enough, quite frankly, we have a real opportunity here to add sustainable nitrogen management to the menu of solutions available. I welcome the continued leadership of Sri Lanka and look forward to hearing about the outcomes of your work.
Thank you. I'm now delighted to welcome His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President of Sri Lanka, and he's going to speak about Sri Lanka's progressive ambitions for nitrogen and climate opportunities for cooperation. Thank you.
Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to address you this evening, and I'm very happy to see such an illustrious turnout at this event. As we are all aware, climate change is one of the greatest crises the world currently faces. The leaders of nearly all countries are meeting over the next 2 days to discuss and hopefully commit to actions that will start leading us out of it. In doing so, one of the key issues that Sri Lanka and some other countries will rightfully draw attention to is that of sustainable nitrogen management. In October 2019, 14 nations joined the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. This important declaration encourages nations to develop national roadmaps for sustainable nitrogen management with a view to reducing nitrogen waste in half by 2030. I thank the nations already associated with this declaration and encourages others to do the same. Nitrogen is an abundant element that is essential to the sustenance of all living things. However, reactive nitrogen generated by human activity and released into ecosystems worsens climate change. Overuse of nitrogen, especially in fertilizers, has adverse impact on soil, water, air, and human health. For decades, chronic kidney disease has been a serious issue in Sri Lanka's agricultural heartland. The overuse of chemical fertilizers has contributed significantly to this problem. It is in this context that my government took firm steps to reduce imports of chemical fertilizer and strongly encourage organic agriculture. Although this action has been broadly appreciated, it has also met with some criticism and resistance. In addition to chemical fertilizer lobby groups, this resistance has come from farmers who have grown accustomed to overusing fertilizer as an easy means of increasing yields. This is particularly unfortunate considering Sri Lanka's rich agricultural heritage. Sri Lanka was known in historic times as the granary of the East. This reputation was achieved in part due to the sophistication of our ancient hydraulic civilization. It was also supported by the traditional wisdom and practices inherited by our farmers in the past, who understood the importance of respecting nature and worked hard to sustain it. The challenge facing us now is to use modern scientific techniques and practices to enhance agricultural production without causing environmental degradation. We require a new agricultural revolution that has sustainability at its core. Sri Lanka's philosophical heritage, enriched by the teachings of Lord Buddha, has always encouraged us to balance ecological concerns with human needs. Humans must be in sync with nature rather than work against it. My government's policy frameworks emphasize sustainability. This is reflected in Sri Lanka's ambitious, updated, nationally determined contributions to the UNFCCC mechanism. These include increasing the contribution of renewable energy sources to 70% of national needs by 2030, achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, and ensuring no more new coal power projects. Sri Lanka is proud to be a co-lead of the Energy Compact for no new coal power. We also play a leadership role in mangrove restoration and conservation, including through the Commonwealth Blue Charter. Sri Lanka's progressive agenda on the environment is despite the resource constraints it faces as a developing nation. Sustaining such an agenda alongside development programs is challenging for all developing nations, especially following the pandemic. I therefore hope that developed countries will extend their fullest support to such nations through development assistance, technology transfers, skills development, investment, and financing support. There is also a significant role for businesses in this endeavor, and significant returns to be made in investments into sustainability. Sri Lanka especially welcomes investments into renewable energy as well as organic agriculture, and is prepared to support their success through incentives and appropriate policy interventions. I therefore hope that greater cooperation in this regard will be forthcoming in future. All of us alive today are custodians of this planet on behalf of future generations. We must all work together towards ensuring its health by contributing in whatever way we can. If we all do this in a spirit of togetherness and goodwill, I'm certain we will succeed in effecting positive change for our people and our planet. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very insightful comments. Now, in a change of speaker in your programme, I'm pleased to introduce Ken O'Flaherty, the COP26 Regional Ambassador for Asia Pacific and South Asia at the following Commonwealth Development Office and in the Cabinet Office team for COP26. You're very welcome. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Government of Sri Lanka for organising this important event today. I send the apologies from Lord Ahmed, our Minister, with whom I spoke earlier today. He was unfortunately trapped in a train which was not moving due to the problems on the West Coast line today. So he sends his heartfelt regards to the Government and to the President today. I'd also like to welcome the very strong collaboration between Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom, and it's great to see so many government representatives, but also scientists and experts assembled here today as well. And we agree that it is very important to raise awareness of the impact that nitrogen pollution is having and continues to have on the climate, on the environment, and on our health. The need for global action to protect our planet for future generations has never been so urgent. The UK, of course, has played a leading role among developed countries in cutting carbon emissions. We were the first major economy to legislate for net zero emissions by 2050. Our Prime Minister's plan for a green industrial revolution sets ambitious goals around technology development and research and innovation. And of course, we also recently set in law the world's most ambitious climate change target of cutting our emissions by 78% by 2035 compared with 1990 levels. But of course, climate change is a global challenge that does not respect international borders. Governments have to work together on coordinated action and unite to deliver our shared goals. As COP26 presidency, we are determined to deliver action on all three pillars of the Paris Agreement, agreed 5 years ago, including mitigation, adaptation, and of course the climate finance issue, which was very correctly raised by the President just a few moments ago. And it's also essential to ensure that our actions are for the benefit of all communities and that there is no one left behind. I was very pleased myself to visit Sri Lanka in August, and I was able to discuss Sri Lanka's plans for both domestic action and for engagement internationally ahead of COP26. And it has been wonderful to see those commitments and plans translated into action. I very much welcome the announcement of Sri Lanka that it is committed to ambitious NDC targets, and of course your revision of the net zero target from 2060 to 2050. The UK is delighted to be leading with Sri Lanka on the No New Coal Power Compact. I hope very much that more global partners will join us in coming days in this important commitment to cease building coal power plants. And I also welcome the Colombo Declaration goal to halve nitrogen waste. It's essential that we reduce the damaging impact of reactive nitrogen on our habitats, on our water, and on our air quality. This summit here in Glasgow is a pivotal moment, and the eyes of the world are upon us. So let's keep working together to deliver on our ambitious targets and to meet our commitments in protecting our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are about to have our last video statement of the evening, and this is Mobilizing the Berlin Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. And this has been recorded by State Secretary Mr. Jochen Flasbarth of the Federal Ministry of Environment of Germany. Thank you.
Mr. President, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to speak to you. Let me start by thanking Sri Lanka and the rest of the SACEP countries for their firm commitment to sustainable nitrogen management. Human activities over the last century have more than doubled the amount of nitrogen introduced into the biosphere. As a consequence, planetary boundaries have been significantly exceeded not only for biodiversity loss, but also for nitrogen. The public and policymakers, however, are only partially aware of how serious the situation is. This must change so that the amount of nitrogen released into the environment can be significantly curbed. The International Nitrogen Initiative contributes to these necessary changes by holding the world's largest conference on nitrogen. The 8th INI Global Nitrogen Conference was hosted by Germany last spring. Its final document, the Berlin Declaration, captures the essence of the global challenge ahead. I would like to express German Environment Minister Svenja Schulze's strong support for the declaration and convey her warmest greetings. The Berlin Declaration clearly shows that most of the SDGs are linked to the nitrogen problem. Many of them can only be reached if we manage nitrogen more responsibly and efficiently. We must adequately take into account all the environmental impacts and hidden costs of high nitrogen inputs. In addition, we must identify and resolve conflicting objectives in policy decisions. The declaration calls on us to use the days we spent here in Glasgow and also the upcoming negotiations to stress the important role nitrogen plays in combating climate change, preserving biodiversity and protecting human health, and to emphasize how synergies can be leveraged when tackling all these challenges. This will ultimately make it easier to set international and national mitigation targets that are both ambitious and coherent. And this is exactly what we need. With this in mind, I wish all of us constructive discussions over the next 2 weeks.
Our next speaker is Dr. Masumur Rahman, the Director General of the South Asian Cooperative Environment Programme, SACEP, and also from Government of Bangladesh. Thank you.
Excellency President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Excellency President of Maldives, Honorable Ministers of different ministries, Government of Sri Lanka, dear international colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today, our event is on discovering nitrogen. Nitrogen is an abundant element found everywhere and is one of 4 elements that forms basic building blocks of all lives. Nitrogen cycles through all the Earth's system in its different forms, defining our environment in different manners. Over the years, nitrogen pollution by human activities have negatively impacted to the climate change, food security, loss of biodiversity, and critical ecosystems. Distinguished guests, South Asia is one of the global hotspots for nitrogen pollution and ranks second in fertilizer uses globally. A population of nearly 2 billion people to feed and a high economic growth has been the main cause of this increased pollution of nitrogen in the region. And unfortunately, this nitrogen pollution is taxing a high cost from the region. Air quality of the South Asian cities are among the worst, with development of smog, especially I like to mention in New Delhi, Dhaka, and Karachi during winter. This has a large impact on human health and puts an undue burden on critical health infrastructure of the region. The oxygen level of South Asian seas are declining, causing deterioration of coastal ecosystem and its service like coral reefs and mangroves. Recently, we are observing the increases of the dead zones in South Asia seas, which is really alarming. Livelihood of coastal community of the region heavily depends on these services like fisheries, food, tourism, etc. We must also acknowledge the fact that some parts of the region faces droughts, famine, and loss of greenery due to lack of nitrogen and erosion of soil. All these elements are creating a severe negative impact on climate change in South Asia. Excellencies, as we are at COP26, I would like to highlight the close relation between the UNEP Convention and the Sustainable Nitrogen Management Systems. The objective of the convention calls for, quote, stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Such a level should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystem to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner, unquote. The first part of the statement is about mitigation, while the second part is maintaining resilience and adaptation. When this is interpreted in terms of nitrogen, it calls for reduction of nitrous oxide emissions, reduction of nitrogen pollution to ecosystems, improve efficiency of food systems to ensure food security for the growing demand, and continue economic development with minimal nitrogen pollution. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report says that in order to achieve the objective of the Convention of the Paris Agreement, global greenhouse gas emission would need to be net zero by 2050. Given the role of nitrogen in climate change system, I believe that achieving net zero by this deadline would need to involve sustainable nitrogen management, and it must be pursued more coherently and aggressively. Excellencies, under these circumstances, I would like to thank our South Asian leadership for their great efforts in tackling bold steps they have taken proactively to address the nitrogen management issues domestically and regionally, and also bringing up to relevant international fora. I would like to highlight that all countries in the South Asia region have included aspects of sustainable nitrogen management system in many of the national policies. The ban on agricultural residual burning, shifting to organic farming to reduce chemical fertilizer use, accelerating implementation of renewable energy, e-mobility, and promoting circular economy have been key nitrogen-related policies that we are emphasizing for South Asia region. SACEP, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I must say like this: SACEP is a pioneer regional organization which is responsible to environmental sharing, knowledge, technology transfer, pursuing effort to establish regional framework policy on nitrogen management, which will support national effort and facilities collective regional active on sustainable nitrogen management. I must mention, though South Asia has taken bold activities domestically, we should also realize that South Asian countries are all developing countries, and like all others, we too require access to finance, access to technology, and knowledge efficiency in tackling the issues of nitrogen management. So, achieving global net zero requires international action to foster changes in the way that humans manage all nitrogen resources and forms of nitrogen pollution. Given its relevance on current scientific evidence, it is imperative to bringing forward sustainable nitrogen management approaches as a set of key climate action needed to meet the temperature target of 1.5 degrees Celsius below. With this, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to request you all, please come and let us put our hands together to implement sustainable nitrogen management policy and place a better world for tomorrow for our next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. In order to address the question, why focus on nitrogen, we're now going to hear a two-way conversation between Professor Mark Sutton and Urmi Goswami, one of the editors of the Economic Times of India. We're particularly grateful to Urmi for stepping in at relatively short notice to participate in this discussion. Thank you.
So, I mean, this is a really highly prepared conversation. Hopefully feedback will become adjusted in a moment. Because we have a suspicion that Lord Ahmed and Patrick Greenfield may be on the same train. And if not leaves on the line, three on the line. And who's got the chainsaw? But there we are, we're here today, and with serendipity, I went to look at the salmon who are in the dining room in COP26. Those salmon are glass salmon, they're really beautiful. The question is, why is the salmon in decline in Scotland? Is it because of climate change? Is it because of overfishing? Is it because of nutrient pollution in the water? The waters have been really green this year. How well does a salmon spawn when there's full of nutrients and the salmon can't lay its eggs well? These are questions, and at that very moment, I found myself sitting next to Urmi. Entirely by chance, of course, naturally. And we last saw each other, I think, in UNEP, in the United Nations Environment Assembly, possibly the very week that the nitrogen resolution was signed. So here we are, Urmi. We have a moment to talk about nitrogen.
Yeah, it looks like we have come a long way, no? As far as nitrogen. Maybe not fast enough, but it's some recognition, isn't it?
I think so. I think we're here. So you have to ask me some tough questions because we haven't really prepared, but we're ready for anything. You ask tough questions, I will attempt to answer.
Okay, is that like a way of saying to lowball questions to you? Because that looks like it. Like
lowball?
Like give you easy ones.
No, I want hard ones.
Okay. So I have a simple question, and I think I've asked you this many times over, but never really been happy with your answer. So this is your chance.
Okay.
We are at COP26, and you have the European Union and the UK also, and the US pushing the methane pledge.
Okay.
And because methane's global warming potential is much higher than carbon dioxide, isn't nitrogen oxide, nitrogen gases, which is also part of the greenhouse gas basket, even higher?
Yes.
And then, so where's your pledge?
Okay, so I'm not the government. Some of you are governments, and it's very easy to convince me. And I think, yes, of course, yes, carbon, yes, methane, but the nitrous oxide warming potential is 300 times that of carbon dioxide.
Right.
And I'm left wondering, why is nitrous oxide always forgotten? Even in the European Union, we had a great meeting. We put together a guidance document on sustainable nitrogen management. So if you want to know solutions, there's 74 different potential solutions. And we got the people from the European Commission, the Directorate General for Agriculture came, and Environment, and they were all there representing air and water. But the group that was missing was the climate team of DG Environment, because you tried to identify the nitrous oxide person there, and they're everywhere invisible. Maybe they're just invisible, actually. So you don't need to convince me. I think let's ask the question, why is it invisible? Because it's just one part of many. It's always a conversation about the greenhouse gas balance, budget, the basket, sorry. So then that's why I think we have to make this big change in our thinking, that it's not just about, we're not just here to control CO2 and methane and N2O. That is not our job. In fact, it's big enough, but it's not enough.
Right.
And it's not enough because we need to mobilize the change. And if we're going to mobilize the change, we have to do more.
But the issue is this. Today we are talking, in 2021, we are talking about net zero emissions. Of course, there's a bit of confusion everybody seems to have about net zero emissions, whether it's net zero greenhouse gas emissions or by 2050 or just carbon dioxide. But confusion apart, there is an agreement across the board that your greenhouse gas emissions have to, go towards zero. And when you're talking sinks, we're doing all when we're having that conversation, clearly, then we are going to look at agriculture, forestry, livestock. Those have become serious issues if you're talking about net zero. Why is nitrogen still behind?
Yeah. So, and I think it's because the climate narrative has become so powerful. If you look at environmental issues, I would say, don't know about you, that climate is the big issue of the day. 20 years ago it was acid rain, but acid rain is a bit of history. Now it's climate. And so with our blinkers on, we're all aiming for climate. But when you're with CO2, I think that's fair enough, it's the dominant issue. But when it comes to nitrogen, that's where you miss the fact that it's not only nitrous oxide for greenhouse gas, it's ammonia for air pollution. And just to give you an illustration, some scientists a few years ago, not far from here, recommended bring all your cattle indoors into the animal house, because when they're indoors, they won't be defecating in winter on the field, and that will reduce the nitrous oxide emissions. Great recommendation. And I, as an ammonia scientist, because ammonia is my favorite nitrogen compound, said, no, don't do that, because the moment you bring the animals indoors, you're massively increasing by a factor of 10 the ammonia emissions. The ammonia goes up, comes back down, lands on a forest, and then the forest soil starts emitting nitrous oxide. So this is a perfect illustration of how climate-only thinking leads you down some dodgy lines. And I think this is where overcoming the barriers to change, because if we can tell you, and if you're a farmer, or whoever you are, that you will get climate and air pollution and water pollution and save some money at the same time, maybe you're willing to change.
But isn't that's the narrative of, say, net zero, or at least the narrative of things like the EU Green Deal and other such Green Deals. But the issue here is how do you get, I mean, one pushback I can think of is from countries with large farming populations, especially small farm holdings, pushing back in the name of saying we can't afford to take these measures. Though, I mean, it's clearly not completely true, because we see many initiatives in those countries. How do you get governments to actually see this as something that will help livelihoods of farmers improve? I mean, take India, from where I am. The government has a stated sort of goal of doubling farmers' incomes. Now, they're talking in terms of many allied activities, efficiencies, all kinds of things. They also talk about using less, chemical fertilizers, neem coating fertilizers, using less urea, so on and so forth. But it's going to take time for that change. But how do we ensure that the conversation of livelihood and addressing the nitrogen pollution issue is brought closer together? I mean, not just in terms of air pollution, and it's much more direct.
Yeah, no, I follow you, and I think that is a fundamental barrier. If people think that nitrogen management is going to be hard for livelihoods, they don't want to do it.
Right.
And I think this is why we have to change the narrative. A few years ago, we were all on a narrative of reduced pollution, and that's a good narrative, but it feels like it's only pain. And then we went to a narrative about increased efficiency. You can't really object to increasing efficiency. Everybody wants to increase efficiency. But then we wanted to set some common goals, and it's hard to share common goals with that, because those who are already doing well end up being pushed to do even better, and those who are low don't have to do much. And then the third stage in this was then the narrative to say, let's reduce the wasted amount of nitrogen. And by wasted nitrogen, what we mean is that which didn't go to any useful purpose. So we've made fertilizer, or we've had an internal combustion engine that's made nitrogen oxides. How much of that is usefully used? And then, let's say the halve nitrogen waste discussion, which is then in the Colombo Declaration. If you halve your waste, that's a big, brave goal, but if you have no waste, you have nothing to do.
Right.
So then it's equitable. And then secondly, we've got to convince people that that's actually good for their living. Because a few years ago, people would also say, reduce your nitrogen inputs on the farm. Reduce pollution, reduce your inputs. But the moment you have that, you set up this fight between somebody who says, no, but I want my nitrogen inputs to produce my food, so I don't want to stop.
Right.
So that's not a story I take.
No.
I would say, let's not talk about that. Let's say we're going to reduce the waste. Because if you reduce the waste, whether you have so much nitrogen or so little, whether you're, in the middle of China with bucket loads, or in a poor part of the world with very little access to fertilizers or other organic resources, wherever you are, if you halve the waste, then you are letting it last longer.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is then, if you make it last longer, then you don't need so much input. But the reduced input is the end of the chain, it's the result, rather than the first statement.
Right.
And that means then you can say, okay, you can afford to save this money because you've wasted less.
Right. How do I actually get people to do that? I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, and it's great when we are talking, but the problem is getting the conversation running.
So let's take it down to the different sectors.
Okay.
And farming is a big sector. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about wastewater as well. I'm very excited about wastewater, speaking as an atmospheric scientist.
Right.
But let's take the farming first, how to get people to change. I think the first is guidance and support on the measures that will make a difference. And the second is, let's say, seeing experience from leading farmers who can show that it works. So a farmer that's put in place a new technology, and as a result, he can see in his balance sheet that he's making more money because he doesn't need to put so much chemical fertilizer on. And then he's become more economically effective. And when the farmers talk amongst themselves and says, Farmer Joe down the road has got this new technology, we all want it. So I think the leading by example is a great opportunity.
So I'm going to ask you to put a pause there, because you used two words which I realize will be difficult for a lot of farmers in this world to relate to: balance sheet and technology. Now, how do you get a small farmer with 2 acres of land to actually, you know, who's basically a subsistence farmer by any other name, to relate to Joe the farmer with things in terms of balance sheet?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, farming is exceptionally diverse, from a smallholder farmer in one part of the world to a big business farmer in North America. Clearly, the kind of technology solutions are going to be different, but actually the common thinking often underlies similar ones. So, one of my favorite is, if you have a cow and you collect manure, everybody should have a lid on their manure pit. And if you go to the UK, you will see so many farmers here who don't have a lid on their manure pit. This is not rocket science. So in talking in Guntur in India with zero budget natural farmers, I was really happy to discuss the manure pit with the farmers. It's a great conversation, this. And they were carefully putting their lid on, saving the resources, and it's a really simple technology. And you can go all the way from that up to the really expensive, according to where people are at.
Do you think there needs to be more collaborative research for dissemination of these, let's say, even the middle-level technologies which are now not available? Like, I know that it's unfair to make a climate comparison, but I'm going to make it because it's the easiest to make. And that is, take something like the International Solar Alliance. It has at its heart talking about dissemination of simple technologies which should be available to people who are in poor countries with so much sun but no electricity. Is there an equivalent we can do for perhaps that could?
Yeah, I think we need to do it, and we have 1 minute. So I think we need to do it. We've given a document that's been agreed by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. That's North America, Europe through to Central Asia. That's matching to that region, and I think one of the challenges we work in the South Asia Nitrogen Hub and in the International Nitrogen Management System is going to be working with our colleagues to find out what do they think are the best technologies in their region.
Thank you. I hope I was a good stand-in.
You were brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. It's very difficult to interrupt a conversation where people are very passionate and knowledgeable about their subject matter, so I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. But I did have to interrupt because we have our next speaker, Baroness Scotland of Asthall, the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, and she is Secretary General of the Commonwealth and is going to speak about the Commonwealth Blue Charter, Mangroves and Sri Lanka progressive partnership in mitigating climate change impacts. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege and pleasure for me to be able to address you on one of my favourite subjects, which is climate change and what we need to do about it. And if I may start by saying how grateful I am that Sri Lanka has chosen to lead, not just on the issue in relation to nitrogen, but also in relation to mangroves and our ecological development. And I really want to extend my warm gratitude to you, Mr. President, for your kind invitation to me to share in this really important conversation, which recognises that managing nitrogen pollution is an important factor in reducing greenhouse gases and in order to tackle climate change. And if I may, I just want to remind ourselves of how devastating the impact of climate change currently is. Sri Lanka has been on this journey with the Commonwealth, and as you all know, the Commonwealth is 54 countries, representing about 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. And we started on this journey as a Commonwealth family way back in 1989 with the Langkawi Declaration, which was in Malaysia. And everything we're talking about today, if you regrettably go back and look at that Langkawi Declaration, all the worries about this being an existential threat, it was there, and Sri Lanka was leading then, and Sri Lanka is still leading now. But we are facing some of the world's most dangerous times. If you look at the climate-related disasters, they are increasing and almost doubling. From the period of 1980 to 1990, we had about 431 climate disasters. From 2010 to 2020, we have had 815. And Sri Lanka will remember so painfully the tsunami. And that was really contributed to by the failure to appreciate how precious our mangroves were. And therefore, I was incredibly grateful when I came to Sri Lanka, when Sri Lanka agreed to lead for our Commonwealth in relation to the Blue Charter Action Group on mangroves. And that leadership was essential and painful because it came from experience. But the Commonwealth coming together has made an extraordinary difference. And so when we look at mangroves, when we look at what we're doing together, the way in which we are melding the science with the practical application that makes the difference, I think we do have a methodology which will enable us to change things. Because the Commonwealth, and through Sri Lanka's leadership, we're not just looking at what works, we're also very significantly sharing together what does not work. And through this combination of practical experience and science, we've been able to make an extraordinary difference. And that leads us right into what we now can do, not just through the Blue Charter, but what our countries intend to do by coming together to respond to what we're calling the call for living lands. Because the Commonwealth has realized that we need to triangulate the work. We need to look at what we're doing with the atmospherics, and there you'll see the work we're doing on common sensing, using satellite data to help us predict what is going to happen, looking what's happening in the oceans, so we're not just looking at carbon, but then looking at the land. And so we then turn to the discussion of this evening as to what has happened in relation to nitrogen. And I really want to commend what Professor Sutton has done and others, and to say that we in the Secretariat are now looking at how we create implementation toolkits. Because this declaration, the Colombo Declaration, is of extraordinary importance. But just as we've put together the action groups for the Blue Charter, we will now need action groups to implement the call for living lands, which I hope we as a Commonwealth will put into action in the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in exactly the same way that we did the Blue Charter in 2018. So I really want to commend the President and the government of Sri Lanka for the leadership and camaraderie that they have displayed not only to the Commonwealth but to the global community for working so hard in making the Colombo Declaration a reality. And what I hope that we will do together, and I'm inviting Professor Sutton and all those here to join with us, may I just mention on a pro bono basis, to join to make an implementation toolkit, because everybody has been talking not just about what we say, but now is the moment for us to decide what are we actually going to do. And we have to have practical, implementable processes which can be shared by all of us so that we really do leave no one behind. Nitrogen can no longer be a forgotten element. There are things that we know will work. There are also things we know that do not work and we need to stop doing. And so this is a moment where we can decide that we will together create an implementation toolkit which will turn aspiration into real action. Because one of the problems that we have had, and what we still have today, is so many of us are willing to talk, and yet so few of us are willing to do. May I just commend both the presidents who are here with us today, because both Maldives and Seychelles and Sri Lanka have shown that they're not interested in talking, but they're totally committed, totally, absolutely committed to doing. And so I hope that all of those of us who will come today, participate in this meeting, will not just be talking about what we're going to say, but each of us, every single one of us, will say, as a result of what we have done by coming together, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And so I will start with my own commitment. I will make sure that we in the Secretariat convene all of those who have a real commitment to addressing the issues of the Blue Charter, addressing the issues of mangroves, and addressing the issues of nitrogen, and we will together come up with a scheme which will enable us to implement so that we are the difference that we want to see to make. The Commonwealth has always led. I wish that we had been wrong in 1989. I wish that when our advisors got together in 1987, people listened. But I think the Commonwealth is still leading today, and I'm very proud that both Sri Lanka and with us, Maldives, are continuing to raise that Commonwealth banner. We represent, we're the petri dish of the world, and we can come up with solutions. We can find the pathways, and together I think we will. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Dr. Anil Jasinghe, the Secretary of the Environment for Sri Lanka. And he's going to speak on Sri Lanka's aspirations on sustainable nitrogen management, COP26 and beyond. Thank you.
His Excellency, the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, His Excellency, the President Ibrahim Muhammad Solih, His Excellency Ken O'Flaherty, COP26 Regional Ambassador, Honorable Ministers, distinguished speakers, Excellencies, delegates. It is such an honor to be here today in this beautiful Glasgow city receiving people from all over the world who will transform the planet Earth a better place. I am inspired by the global commitments expressed and partnerships extended by the international community for the Nitrogen for Net Zero campaign on nitrogen for climate at the COP26 and beyond. Humanity's very existence depends on an efficient nitrogen cycling. Our human species expanded so rapidly due to agricultural practices to increase nitrogen fixation in the soil. We ensured global food security by the discovery of nitrogen fertilizers, but worldwide signals prove us that we have been failed to keep the nitrogen cycle in balance. Therefore, Sri Lanka believed it is critical to raise the alarm about one of the most hidden environmental cycle imbalance. Therefore, Sri Lanka, in 2019, Sri Lanka, with the support from UN Environment Programme and the International Nitrogen Management System, convened a 2-day event at which more than 30 countries came together to adopt the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. Member countries recognized the urgency of addressing nitrogen management in meeting multifaceted threats for environment. In 2019, in Colombo, for the first time, the governments have agreed to work together on a major quantitative global goal for improved nitrogen management with an aspiration to halve nitrogen waste by 2030. This offers a $100 billion opportunity to mobilize innovation for nitrogen circular economy while contributing to environment, health, and livelihoods. Ladies and gentlemen, with this glorious memory, in the presence of His Excellency the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, I am honored to announce today that the government of Sri Lanka submitted a fresh value-added resolution on sustainable nitrogen management on 26th October 2021, proposing more comprehensive actions beyond the UNEA 4.14 resolution of 2019. As you know, UNEA 4.14 resolution of 2019 provided a general framework to act on nitrogen cycle. It has started the process of sustainable nitrogen management. But with Colombo Declaration launched in Sri Lanka in 2019, we now have more clarity on how this process needs to be moved forward comprehensively with ambitious targets. This proposed resolution prepares way for the second phase of action in following up UNEA Resolution 4.14, allowing acceleration among member states in the run-up to UNEA 6. The resolution will reach broad agreement on the overall concept of interconventional nitrogen coordination mechanism, the INCOM, the detailed terms of reference of which will then be proposed in advance of UNEA 6. I acknowledge the initiatives taken by United Nations Environment Programme, include the GEF, the International Nitrogen Initiative, including contributions from the Global Partnerships on Nutrient Management, the South Asia Cooperation Environment Programme, and the GCRF South Asia Nitrogen Hub, established with support from the Global Challenge Research Fund of United Kingdom Research and Innovation. I look forward the continued scientific guidance on national, regional, and global policies on sustainable nitrogen management of all of these institutes and their great scientists and professionals. We must pull back the curtain and move the world to action. This new proposal marks the plan for the journey. The year 2030 is fast-reaching, and therefore Sri Lanka introduced several new elements in the proposed resolution as highlighted in Colombo Declaration. This new resolution will lay the foundation for action on nitrogen for climate, coordinating all the relevant multilateral environment agreements via the INCOM, which will be implemented by a dedicated secretariat. We need urgent action as a global community to address the evolving multifaceted threats on nature and to transform nitrogen cycling more efficient by reducing the waste as a priority. We also need to be very clear about the impact of nitrogen challenge on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, because whether it is land, food security, biodiversity, pollution, or water quality, nitrogen impacts each and everyone. I hope once we have grabbed the world's attention on this complex problem, there's so much that can be done. There are promising signs that some nations are already starting to wake up to the problem. As we begin COP26 together, we need to see this thinking feeding into the climate negotiations. For if we want to achieve our climate goals, we will need not only to manage carbon. It is essential that we also act on nitrogen. Sri Lanka pioneered the global campaign on sustainable nitrogen management since 2019, and we have been working hard to achieve the goals of Colombo Declaration and the proposed new resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. Our children deserve a planet with clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, no threats to existence, and sufficient oxygen for the life underwater. Therefore, this conversation we had today is so crucial. If we are going to raise nitrogen up on agenda, then we need to sound the alarm loud and clear. Once we have grabbed the world's attention, there's so much that we can do. I trust you all will partner with His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the UNEP 5 to consider this proposal as a priority for UNEP 5. I'm sorry, madam, I think I couldn't address you at the beginning, the Right Honorable Baroness Patricia. Sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker giving some concluding remarks is the Honourable Professor Peiris, Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Your Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa, President of Sri Lanka, the Right Honourable Baroness Patricia, Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Honourable Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We have listened to some fascinating presentations this evening. But as these proceedings draw to a close, I think one thing is perfectly clear, and that is that my own country, Sri Lanka, is ideally equipped to play a pioneering role in global initiatives with regard to climate change and biodiversity. I say this for one particular reason. We in Sri Lanka have never believed for one moment that there is any conflict of any kind between economic development on the one hand and the preservation of the environment on the other. We have always been convinced that these two go together. They're complementary. They're two sides of the same coin. The belief is very deeply ingrained in the culture and civilization of Sri Lanka that industrial and economic development achieved at the expense of the environment is by its very nature not sustainable. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa of Sri Lanka recently made a courageous decision. This was a decision which will have a profound impact on all agricultural activity in Sri Lanka. It entailed a decisive shift from the use of chemical to organic fertilizer. And the reason for that decision was the paramount need to protect the purity of our rivers and streams, our water bodies, the ocean that surrounds us, and to prevent the spread of kidney disease, which was becoming an alarming phenomenon, particularly in the rural heartland of Sri Lanka. In her remarks this evening, Baroness Patricia Scotland conveyed to us what I think is a critical message. She emphasized implementation as opposed to aspiration. This is because we do not have the luxury of time. Lofty aspirations and plans for the future alone are not sufficient. What is urgently required is immediate implementation. The British Prime Minister, a couple of days ago, I read in the media, made an interesting comment in Rome. He said that, in his view, the greatest enemy of climate change is political apathy and indifference. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said that all of humanity is in the ring. I wish to assure you that in Sri Lanka, far from there being political indifference, ours is an attitude of intense commitment and rigorous involvement. I therefore assure you that my country will always be a resolute and steadfast partner with all of you in your efforts, in all your efforts directed towards the preservation of the environment and much more, the very survival of this planet for the benefit of generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our event on rediscovering nitrogen. I've written down 3 words. I found it instructive, inspirational, and truly international. And I'd like you to join with me in thanking all of our speakers and those of you in the audience as well. Thank you.